Ireland and Stephen Kenny maintained much of the feel-good factor around Irish football despite defeat against France. And two of his former clubs go head-to-head as the Premier Division returns. I'm joined in Independent.ie by soccer correspondent Daniel McDonnell, who'll be at Oriel Park to see Dundalk host Shamrock Rovers. And again, early in the season, Dan, it's a big game for both of them. Rovers still without a win.
Yeah, again, it's a massive game for Rovers in a venue where they have a pretty bad record in recent memory, even in years where Dundalk have been chaotic, like 2020, when Dundalk was imploding in 2021, and they still registered wins over Shamrock Rovers. There was that night, I think it was May 2021, where there was like a big protest outside the ground and the whole thing was falling apart at Dundalk, and yet they still managed to beat Rovers. A Rovers side that wasn't losing many games, it wasn't dropping many points. So it's a tough place to go when you're looking to get your momentum back. And that's why it really does feel like a game of significance at a pretty early stage of the season. I mean, Dundalk have probably slipped under the radar, a little bit of an unknown this year. Robbie Benson was saying it this week, that because a lot of people wouldn't know a lot of the new players they've signed, a lot of them picked up from the English academy system. A lot of English players, sort of age 20, English, Scottish, age 23 and under, they were just sort of written off in some ways, or certainly underestimated. But they seem to have done their homework okay on the recruitment front. And after a slow start to the season, the first couple of games, they've got a little bit of form going. And crucially, I mean, they hammered St. Pat's there. They had a little bit of a struggle against Shells, but they still came back and won. And they'll have no fears, I think, about this game.
Yeah, I think they beat Drogheda in the game just before the break. I mean, Rovers have, like, in some ways, if you're going to really put down the mark and say, listen, kind of, you haven't gone away, then games against Dundalk and Bohs, which I think are their next two of the top three away from home, in some ways, they're probably the best games you could have to really sort of say, listen, we're still in this mix.
I think they're the best games you could have from the optimistic point of view. Now, you are right. Like, if they can come away with a victory from either of those games, I think either of them. I think even if you offered them 4 points now from those two games, I think that would give them the platform to possibly go on a bit of a run. But the alternative is if they don't register a win from either of them and then they're 8 without a win, it just becomes a little bit more. Yeah, how many points are they going to be behind then? They're 10 behind Bohs at the moment. Realistically, it's probably Derry you're looking at. If they sort of pick up wins in the next couple of games, then it just becomes a little bit of a thing. I'm very conscious of just not getting carried away as you can early in the season. Mm-hmm. But no, like, I just think because of their recent record against the Dog, I find this particularly tricky. I think also as well, I mean, the Astro surface in Oriel wouldn't be terrific. And I think sometimes with Rovers, like, they are a team that's pretty wedded to their philosophy, and they are capable at times of going direct, and they've done it. Like, they often do it, but I think sometimes it presents them with a little bit of a dilemma, that they have to maybe alter some of their natural approach, and maybe that takes away some of the attributes of your side, some of the attributes of your players. Whereas Dundalk are very efficient on a good day of working really hard, restricting space, and forcing Rovers to go maybe even more direct than they would want to on this pitch. But they have good technical players as well, Dundalk, and I think we're probably still learning it. I would say even Dundalk haven't been at times been playing particularly well in some of the games. Drogheda, they were poor enough in the first half, but they've actually managed to get into the habit of, like, they've got into a couple of tight scrapes and won games against Shells as well. The Rovers just haven't done that this season, all these conceding late goals. So I'm looking forward to it because it really, like, it feels like it's going to be a really big game feel around it. And, I think it's going to be a good one.
Yeah, you mentioned Derry. Derry have a repeat of the cup final against Shells. Shells have been a tough nut to crack, as we've discussed many times. I guess Derry be looking a bit like the cup final for an early goal and maybe hope to open things up. That seems to be probably the key against Shells because they are a very, very tough nut to crack.
Yeah, I mean, and the Shells, in fairness to them, the 2 games against Derry and Tolka last year, they succeeded in nullifying them pretty well, but they lost them both, like, to late goals. And the late goal the last time prompted a bit of fun where the Derry players were celebrating in the dressing room afterwards. I think Damien Duffin had a couple of comments in their direction and add a little bit of spice to the cup final when on a bigger pitch and a better service, Derry completely opened them up. Now, I think Shels, I was going to say that, for Shels, was that a scarring experience, the cup final, and that's allowed them, it's almost prompted them to become even more solid, try and become even more solid this year. But I suppose they did succeed against Derry last year. I think about Derry, the fear that the Derry will have, I'm talking about clubs varying it, but they are a very possession orientated team. That's why I make the point that Brandy will argue doesn't suit them. But a Shels team who are capable of being very compact and like they play the same system Ireland played on Monday a lot of the time, and they're actually good at sort of utilizing that. It shows if you're very on point with it, you can restrict space. And like Derry, there is a tendency sometimes to say, okay, you let them have the ball, let Patrick McElhenney have the ball a bit deeper, patching, that's fine. But they don't necessarily have a target man striker that people play off. Like McGonigal is very good. Colin Whelan's going to come back. Ryan Graydon is a right-sided, very direct he can be, but I can see this. This is the TV game. I know I sort of offend people from Shels. I don't mean to, but it's a respect in a way. But they are a team that's not going to lead to a free-flowing, entertaining fixture. Although I would say, it could be a case of getting the building blocks in, and they did beat Shels before the break, and it did seem that, as they beat Cork before the break, it did seem that they were better on the attacking side. And maybe they've got the principles in place and they'll open up more. But I suspect for this one, and they'll set about just letting Derry have it and say break us down.
Yeah. The other game in Dublin is Pat's UCD, the Dublin Derby. It's an interesting one for Pats. I mean, there was obviously Tim Clancy under pressure. They fought back really well against Rovers, changed things up a little bit. This sort of game, they need a performance and the results for Tim Clancy against UCD, where obviously UCD have struggled, but it's a dangerous game for Pats in some ways.
Yeah, I'm not convinced. I'm not sure how much trouble Tim Clancy was in before that game in Tala. I know Aidan Fitz was here, sort of thinking it could be the end. I wouldn't have personally said it was in that position, but of course, they could have got opened up that night, and who knows. But what's true is that they got a late goal. They got huge momentum from it. You would think. They've had a couple of weeks training, or a week's training, and it is a big one for them. Again, it seems with Pats, in fairness to them, very bad start to the season. They're playing UCD at home, the least glamorous fixture you can have, and yet like the ticket sales are flying. So people are sticking with them, but they have to win. Like they have a run of games now that on paper, a team with ambitions of finishing in the top four. Like I think Tim Clancy will be in trouble later in the season if they're not going to. It looks like they're not going to be in Europe again, for example. So like a team that is trying to finish in the top 3 or 4 needs to be taking points from the games they have coming up. So it's an absolute must-win for them to avoid pressure. Now I suppose with Clancy, the speculation, a lot of people were saying, "Oh, was Keith Long waiting in the wings?" I mean, Keith Long's gone to the Waterford now, which would suggest that like there couldn't have been any movements going on if a job was coming up at Pats, do you know what I mean? Like, so it's just that Tim Clancy is fine at the moment, but of course, like he just needs to win this game. It is a must-win. You couldn't describe it any other way.
Yeah. And Cork had a disappointing defeat against Shels at home. They host Drogheda. Again, we talk of certain games that clubs would be targeting. This would be the sort of game, Drogheda at home for Cork, that they'd be. You're not saying must win or anything like that, but given the defeat against Shels and this disappointing nature, that's the sort of thing they'd be really looking to bounce back from.
Yeah, I think it's a huge momentum game for Cork. That Shels one would have been a bit of a disappointing one for them, because I suppose if you're looking at the couple of league tables within the table, and you sort of, now Shels might have higher ambitions, but you sort of see of like Shels, Cork, Drogheda, Sligo Rovers will probably see themselves ahead of it, but they are potentially the teams that are in that sort of 5th to 9th equation, and they all want to be pushing up towards Europe, and they definitely don't want to be sucked away from it. And when Cork lose at home to Shels, I think it's like, okay, well, who are we stronger than around us here? And they've led a number of games away from home and conceded late. So then to lose at home would have been a sicker. But Drogheda, for them, I'm not describing it as a must-win, but I think in their own heads, they'll know that there will be a little bit of unease if they don't.
Yeah. And just into the first division, you mentioned Waterford with Keith Long. They're 10 points behind Galway already. I think they've played a game fewer, all right,
Yeah.
but momentum. They host Finn Harps. It's a long way for Finn Harps. It always tends to be. Waterford kind of need to get going now if they're looking to catch Galway, because Galway don't look like they're going to make too many mistakes.
No, they have to, and that's it. And to me, it's still a slightly surprising appointment in the sense that I know they had Ian Morris, but they often look overseas, and particularly with the Fleetwood Town people sort of calling the shots. But they have a good reputation, Fleetwood, in terms of how they run their own club in the UK, and they've climbed the ranks. And I suppose you make good decisions by not sort of following some philosophy that says, well, we just always bring in managers from outside. You go, no, we aren't bother here. We want to lay down a bit of a footprint here. Let's go for someone who knows the terrain here. And I suppose Keith Long lasted 8 years in his previous job, which is incredible, really. And it shows that he can be someone not just he's not necessarily a short-term firefighting type, but maybe he hasn't really had the chance to do that. I suppose actually in Athlone, the job prior to Bowes, he got on the radar there by nearly rescuing them from an impossible situation. So maybe he is someone to come in and just shake them up. But yeah, big expectation there. Chatting to people at their last game, there was a real unease around the crowd because I think they're probably, after back-to-back playoff defeats, people assumed this year will be their turn. And to be so far behind so early, yeah, he's going to have to hit the ground running.
Yeah, absolutely. Dan, that's been great. Thanks so much for joining us, and we'll be back after tonight's games to review all the action. Thanks for joining us. Bye.
Thank you.